showed me why. Instead of asking why, start asking why not. Time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're lying in the sun. Bit by bit, the older that we get, the faster it ticks. Time flies. Whoa, whoa, time flies.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Marshfield's Old School Times again. This is our third episode, and fourth episode. We're coming to you from the back on the second floor in our podcast room. This is the both national and international headquarters of the Grand Central Marshfield Old Time School podcast facility here. Actually, the second floor of the old high school. And we are extremely honored today to have three very, very special people to me and to many in this community. Don and Leona Rost are with us today. Welcome, Uncle Don, Aunt Leona. Welcome. And we're glad, you betcha, we're glad to have their daughter, Linda Rost Dickinson, with us. Linda, thanks for bringing them in today. This is going to be a special treat today because these two Webster County jewels, they're 92 years old, and I think they're proud of that. They are extremely healthy and sharp, and we are just so proud of them and honored to have them with us today to be able to share some stories from days gone by. And of course, I find that interesting, and I know many of you do too. So we're going to talk a little bit about going to school here in Marshfield, and we're going to talk about living in Webster County and some other stories about this part of the country from those days. But before that, a couple of things I want to mention. I have Logan Fraker, my technician and the producer of the show, back here behind the keyboard. Logan, thanks once again. Logan has the Tech Zone, which is a computer repair, and he builds computers and does a really good job with those. If you need any work done on your computer, he can do it for you. And he's got a little shop set up here in the building. We also are working on the East Wing, the lower level. You may have heard we've got a new sign out front now. If you drive by, we've got the Retro Zone Arcade that's just moved down here from Crittenden Street, and they are getting ready to open. They actually had their first party event today. But they'll be opening on August 5th is the grand opening date, along with the new old school donut shop. And yes, they will have a drive-up window, and they will be open on the weekends and have donuts and breakfast sandwiches and coffee and so forth. So we're really looking forward to them being a part of our campus here and the renovation of the campus and keeping the old school alive. And that's really what our goal and objective is. Of course, Melanie, my wife, has the preschool, Imagination Station Preschool, and has been here now for 14 years, I think, and they do a great job helping raise our kids at those particular points of life. So anyway, with that, one more thing I do want to mention, want to continue to say your prayers for our cousin Brian's wife, Karen Rost, who's in the Barnes Hospital with a heart condition, and she's been up there now for several days, and please keep her in your thoughts and prayers, and Brian and the boys and all the family. So with that, I think we're going to kind of get started here. And as I mentioned, Don and Leona are my uncle and aunt. Uncle Don is my last surviving uncle, and I'm really proud of him and all he's accomplished in his life. And of course, he couldn't have done that without the support of Aunt Leona. And welcome again to the show. We're really glad to have you today.
Thank you, Lyndall. This is an honor and a privilege. This brings back 73 years since we graduated from this great place, and we still have a lot of memories of spending years in it's a lot of changes been made. As I look out the window, I'm reminded that when we were in high school, the music department was in an old two-story house right down here just south of the school, and we would have to walk between classes if we had music. But the old two-story building, heated with an old wood stove, and I remember Lyman Mooney was our instructor, wonderful man. So thank you for bringing back a lot of memories for us.
Absolutely. And that old house, was it about where 2nd Street tees into Marshall out here, or was it?
Actually, it's where There's apartments down
Oh,
there.
it's for a little further down then.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was curious because every time I have a guest on, I learn more about the campus and more about, the history of the facilities here. And so that's good to know where that house was located because I'd heard about that in the past.
We would walk through the snow. Back then, snow didn't stop me going to school.
Right.
So we walked between classes. We had to get out, and Mr. Mooney was our instructor. And as I said, that old wood stove sometimes wouldn't really keep it very warm.
Right, right.
But that was our music hall until 1948 when they built
The band hall.
out here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whatever happened to the old building, but it's tore down.
Yeah. Well, Uncle Don, of course, I wanted to mention a little bit. We'll go back just a little bit. You are my mom's older brother. My mother was Lois Rost Fraker, and
Right.
she was the second child after you. However, you did have another sibling that died as a young boy. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about the firstborn for Cale and Josie?
Well, in 19 and I believe I forget years, but anyhow, his name was James Lowell.
James
Lowell
Lowell.
Rose. And we lived out on a farm on what's the old Seymour Road.
Mhm.
Dad was building a barn. James Lowell was like a week of being 3 years old. Dad was building, and another gentleman was building a log barn where we lived. And they had took in the wagon and went back to the woods to get another load of logs. While they were gone, James Lowell was playing out in the yard. James was a kid. He was curious.
And you were just a baby, an infant, right?
I was 18 months old.
18 months, yeah.
Mom was present with your mom,
She
Lois.
was pregnant with my mom, yeah.
James Lowell went out to where they were building the barn. Curious little boy. Climbed up on the log by log, and he got up to the top and got a hold of the top log, and it wasn't notched yet.
Mm.
So he got a hold of that top log, pulled it off on him, struck him in the head.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom, my mom was pregnant with your mom. She ran at least a half a mile up the road to where the Haley family lived. And as I said, Dad was down in the woods getting another load of logs. But that was how James Lowell was killed.
And that was that the Tom Roast place out there, Tom and
That's
Robin's
what
place
that's
on the
Tom
old Seymour
Roast
Road?
on
Yeah.
Yeah, Elton Farr family
Right.
lived there for a long time.
Right.
But
Well, and it was certainly a tragedy for the family. Of course,
Yeah,
that generation of Roast, Grandpa Cale and Grandma Josie. Cale was one of 6 children, I believe, and so their siblings all lived close in the area, and it was a tragedy to the community, just as one would be today, of course, if an infant passed like that. But so, and then after James Lowell, and then you, and then Mom. That's the first 3, and then there were 4 more, and you'd have Uncle Bob, Aunt June, Uncle E.L.,
June, Bob, E.L.
June,
Phoebe.
Bob, E.L., and then Aunt Phoebe. So, and most of you would know probably a lot of those folks. They lived here most of their lives. So what was it like growing up in the 30s during the Depression? What was it like as a child in Webster County growing up during the Depression, and how did the family provide a livelihood?
When Dad and Mom got married, they lived on the farm for a few months, and then they moved to Marshfield. And they moved there on Maple Street where years later the family lived. But Dad worked for MFA, and he also they had an ice plant in Marshfield. They made ice. They made ice soda pop. But anyhow, they lived there in Marshfield, and That's where the family, just mom and dad and James Lowell. Well, they were farm peoples, so they wanted to go back. So they moved back to the farm. And then that's where I was born, close to where the farm was, where James Lowell. I lived there, and Dad was a farmer then. And then times were tough.
That was the Depression. That was during the Depression.
So we moved again, and over about close to Mount Zion Church, and this is where your mom was born, right down on what we call the Jim Ragsdale place.
They had showed us. She had showed me that one time years ago.
We lived there for a little bit, and Dad wanted to get in a bigger farm, so we moved farther west down on Turnbull. P.O. Phelan, who had a grocery store on the south side of the square, owned a farm down on Turnbull. We moved down there in 1934. That's where we lived when June was born.
Okay.
Times was tough, very tough. This is when my dad decided he no longer wanted to farm. So we moved to town.
Now, many farmers then had to raise tomatoes because there was dry weather. People couldn't afford to buy cattle. I know your grandpa Sam, Cale's dad, was a big tomato raiser, and many others in the family. So, did you guys ever raise tomatoes? Did Grandpa Cale ever raise tomatoes?
No, okay. No. Dad, we lived on a farm. When we moved, as I say, when we left Turnbull down and came to town, Dad started working for Stanley McVeigh Salvage Company, salvage yard, out here where there was a tie yard where they bought railroad ties that was located next to the railroad behind the McVeigh Salvage. And
is that about where Brooks's bulk plant is now?
Brooks's yes, propane. Dad worked for Stanley McVeigh. They would overhaul automobiles. They would work on them. They make doodlebug tractors.
Yeah, which you have one.
I have the one that Dad made, and I made out of a 1928 Chevrolet. So Dad worked with that. Well, the tie yard, as I said, was right located behind the salvage yard and the railroad. The people that owned the rail yard got in touch with Dad and wanted him to be in charge of that tie yard. He would buy it. So
Potosi Tie, right? Potosi Tie was the name of it?
He'd buy the ties. And we worked there. Then Dad hadn't worked there a couple of years, and his boss, who lived in Springfield, came to Dad and wanted our family to move to Arkansas to take care of the tie yards from Batesville or from Eureka Springs all the way down the White River to Batesville. Every town had a little tie yard. They wanted him to be moved down there and take care of those tie
Now, the
yards.
war hadn't hit yet, so this was probably, what, 38, 39, 40?
1940.
1940, okay. And just for those that might not really understand what a tie yard is, it's a place that he would go out and they would buy logs from farmers, or the farmers would bring the logs in, or would they already have would they already have them sawed into ties?
They would buy back then, when they first started, they would hew ties. Then they got sawmills, and they would saw them. They would different people in the county. They would bring their ties that they had made into the tie yard.
And they would buy the ties from them.
And Dad would buy and that's the way they made a living, a lot of it.
And these ties were going, all the railroads had to have ties for the railroads.
Yes.
And so it was a big thing.
The railroad tie was either 6 by 8 by a little over 8 feet long, or an 8 by 10. But that's how the railroads, and we had a lot of railroads back then. You know, for years there was a double railroad, rail ties between here and Springfield.
Right.
They finally done away with them.
And I would imagine, you know, if you think about it, the ties that were cut and hewn back in the 1800s when they were first laid probably weren't treated the way we learned to treat lumber later on, which now we've probably figured out that's probably wasn't a good thing for the environment, but it did preserve those ties and they lasted longer. But in those early day ties probably didn't last really long. They probably were replacing ties a lot on the railroads.
Yes, and even those in Arkansas, a lot of them was pine.
Yeah.
And as you know, a pine tie didn't last as long as a hardwood.
Right.
But the Potosi Tie and Lumber, who owned the tie yards that we're talking about, they did not treat them. They sent them to somewhere else.
I see.
They would buy the ties, but they would sell them to some. There's a place in Springfield that would treat a lot of them.
And was the Potosi Tie, was their headquarters Potosi, Missouri?
Potosi, Missouri. That's the name was named.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and as I said, in every little town that had a railroad that went had a tie yard.
Right.
Because making railroad ties and canning tomatoes was probably the two main things that in this area, and especially in Arkansas.
Yeah.
That's the way people made a living. Of course, in Arkansas they made cotton, but in Arkansas it was cotton and railroad ties. In Webster County it was milking cows, making railroad ties.
So you were in Arkansas. All the kids were born by then. Aunt Phoebe was born by that time.
Phoebe was born in February. We moved in September of 1940.
To Calico Rock.
Calico Rock.
Okay.
Calico Rock is about 50 miles on south of Mountain Home, Arkansas.
And I think I've heard a story where when you moved down there, you know, kind of you loaded all up in a pickup, and some of the kids were in the back of the truck, and you know, it was just kind of like you'd see in the movies back in the day.
We can remember those days.
Migrants going to California.
We can remember those days very good because we were riding the back of the pickup, and Dad had an enclosed camper but the fumes, and we would all get sick, and the first thing we'd see us kids on the back of the pickup beds are leaning over throwing up. And we always wanted to come to Marshfield to meet family, but we dreaded coming.
He dreaded the ride.
Because it made us all sick.
Right. So you were down there how long then in Arkansas?
Pardon?
How many years in Arkansas?
Well, 4 years.
4 years.
3.5, actually 3.5.
Right. And during that time, something nationally happened that was a terrible thing, but a big thing in our country.
I can remember that. Well, let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
When we moved down there, they were, you know, today we have all the dams and lakes down south.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved down there, they were building the North Fork Dam.
Okay.
It wasn't even built. No, a lot of things happened. On December the 7th, 1941, as I've already said, we always listened to KWTO from Springfield. Well, back then at the Shrine Mosque in Springfield on a Sunday afternoon, they always had a gospel singing. And my dad and my granddad would always enjoy gospel singing. So we was sitting in our living room in Calico Rock, Arkansas, on that Sunday afternoon, listening to the gospel singing at the Shrine Mosque in Springfield. I can remember it like it was yesterday. They broke in on the radio. They broke in the theme and said, "This is what the words: the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor." The next day they declared war. But that was you know, memory, a few things you can remember. But I can remember that, as I said, we were sitting there and we heard that. So things began to happen.
I'm gonna have you hold that thought. I'm gonna go to Aunt Leona for a minute. We're gonna catch up now,
Okay.
and we're gonna see what she's been doing up to this point.
Okay.
So, Aunt Leona, I want you to tell us a little bit about where you were raised out here south of Marshfield, I believe, and a little bit about your upbringing in the 30s.
Okay, I was born out by Crown Store, the other side of Crown Store. There was 7 of us kids. There was 3 girls and a boy and 3 girls. The boy was a little bit spoiled, not bad.
Surely not.
And he told me I was the cause of him getting in all the trouble that he got
Oh, of
in.
course.
Because-
Well, sure. Well, that's probably true, though, wasn't it?
No, goodness, no. No,
That was Delmer.
That was Delmer,
Uh-huh.
yes. As I said, we were raised on the farm. We worked out in the fields, and it would come lunchtime, and Mother would say, "Who's going to fix lunch today?" Delmer, "I will." And he would rather go to the house and fix lunch. I'd rather stay outside and
Yeah.
pull the
yeah,
hay bales
yeah.
or whatever, throw rocks or whatever.
What kind of farming did your folks do? Do you remember?
Mostly dairy farming, and Dad did raise tomatoes.
Tomatoes,
We
yeah.
did canned
Because the
tomatoes.
depression was going on, and it was,
Right,
it was tough
yes.
times, and it was the weather was dry. There was droughts during that time. I understand.
Yes, yes. We had a big canning factory,
Mm-hmm.
and had the fireplace to heat the water and everything for scalding the tomatoes. In the summertime, in the wintertime, that nothing was going on down there. And one of my sisters supposedly had gone out to play, and we had a big well down by the factory. And she didn't come back for a while, and we was kind of wondering where she went. Kept calling her, and we looked and we looked and we looked. We looked in the well and looked everywhere, and we couldn't find her. And finally, Daddy walked into the old canning factory and looked down in where the coals would have been, and she had crawled in there and gone to sleep.
Oh,
So
good.
thank goodness.
I bet she was just asleep. I was worried there for a minute.
Yeah. Well, we were worried.
I bet.
And
Now, your dad's name was
Chesley.
Chesley.
He got called Chester a lot.
Chester.
Yeah.
I remember Chester. But with Chesley, that's your grandson's name. Or your
Yes.
Yeah.
Grandson or great grandson?
Yeah.
Grandson. Yeah. See, I can't keep up.
It was hard, yeah.
Yeah.
His name is Chesley Granville. And
Gotcha.
then the grandson is Chesley Cale, which
Yeah, okay.
is after
Yeah.
both
Grandpa
my
Kale.
dads.
Sure. Sure. And so, real quick, name your sisters, because some people won't understand the tie there because they may know some of your sisters. So give us their names and their maiden name and their married name.
Okay. Agnes was the oldest. She married John Galbraith. They were both deceased. Ruby was next. She married Glenn Vandale. They are both deceased. Nadine would be next. She married Basil Andrews. Nadine is in a rest home in Texas. It's where her daughter, she only had the one daughter, and she thought she needed to be down there.
She also married Art Rose.
Art Rhodes,
she
yes.
married Art
Yeah,
Rhodes.
certainly, yeah.
And Delmer was next, and he married Geraldine Wingo. Delmer is deceased. Then I guess I would be next, and I married this.
This guy, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
When I started the high school here, I met him, but I didn't like him.
Uh-oh. Well, wait a minute. You hold that. We're going to get to that in a minute. You finish your sisters.
Okay. And then Sue was next. She married, Sue is deceased. She married Merlin Carter. He lives at Rogersville. And Connie was last, and she is married to Donnie Crawford.
Yeah. Okay. So
they never owned an automobile.
really, growing up,
They walked everywhere where they went.
wow.
Daddy finally bought an automobile whenever Dilmer was about old enough to drive.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
quite.
Wow.
I think Daddy drove that car twice. Hit the ditch both times.
Oh my! But I guess they had horses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, had a team to work
Horse
the
and
fields and
wagon,
wagon. And did he have tractor on the farm?
No.
No. Yeah.
No.
They would heat, and a lot of people did this. Heat the arms that you iron clothes with.
Uh huh.
You put them on the stove and heat them up, and then you wrap them up in something and put them on the wagon to kind of keep you warm.
Yeah. 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 I think the Amish do something similar to that
Something
today.
like that,
Yeah.
yeah.
They,
But Leona had to
Poles
walk
and a
about
bucket or
2 miles to school, up and down the big
wow.
Crown Hill.
2 miles. That's just. And you went 8 years to Crown School,
Yes.
and then came to Marshfield. Obviously, at 8 years is all you could go to the rural schools
That's
back in
right.
those days. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so we wanted to kind of catch up and get you both to about the same point in life. And so you, after the war hit, Pearl Harbor was bombed. Then a couple of years, then you guys came back to Marshfield.
Yeah, the war was about to be over. It was winding down. During the war, you could get an automobile during 53 or 43. And you had to get permits from special people to buy gasoline and tars. So there wasn't much people moving there, going there,
Right.
because you couldn't go anywhere. Yes, the war was winding down. The need for as many railroad ties diminished. So, and we all wanted to come back to Marshfield because we didn't know anybody in Arkansas. They were good people. Don't misunderstand me, but we're good
Wasn't
people.
home. It just wasn't home.
But we wanted to come back to where Grandpa and Grandma and aunts and uncles. So in about April of 1944, we came back to Marshfield.
Yeah.
We ended up moving down here on Maple Street, and which was lucky for us. We didn't have to walk there for school. I was in the 7th grade.
7th grade, okay.
And at that time,
Mom would have been in the 6th grade then, or probably.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was entirely different because the school here, all the grades was in this building.
Yeah.
I'll remember that, and it was quite different. I've told a lot of people. I said, I always respected Arkansas, but they were about 20 years behind us. We moved down there today. You see houses built with metal roofs. Back then, you didn't, in Missouri, you didn't see that. But in Arkansas, they were behind metal roofs and shacks they lived in. But they were very good people.
Mm-hmm.
But, we came back and when I started the school here in 7th grade.
7th grade.
I remember some of the wonderful teachers and people that we had.
Right. And so you were in the 7th grade then. Now, Leona, you went eight grades to Crown, and then you started your freshman year here at Marshfield. So you go ahead and fast forward to your freshman year. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to you, and I want you to tell me the story you were getting ready to tell about Uncle Don when you first laid eyes on him.
Well, there wasn't really anything wrong with him except the girls that he dated was
Questionable? Would that be a good word?
That's a good word. And
Hope all the grandsons are watching this. That'll be something you can share at Christmas, the Rost family Christmas.
but anyway, we came to we had a
Back up.
Oh, wait a minute, we're going to back up. Okay, go ahead.
When I worked at the Marshfield Mail, And when I was old enough, 16, I was one of the few, I was lucky because I was one of the few kids in the school that had an automobile. And so I had there was some good friends of mine.
But it wasn't because mom and dad bought it for you. You worked at the paper and you made the money to buy it.
I made the
That's
money.
right. Yeah.
In fact, when we lived in Arkansas, my mom rode up here to Springfield newspapers, got newspapers sent down there. So when school was out of evening in County Cold Rock, I would walk down to the post office, which was about a mile from where we lived. I would pick up my Springfield newspapers, and I had a route. So I worked. Well, when we came back to Marshfield, I did the same thing. I went down here on Jackson Street to Bob Baldwin's mother, who had got all the newspapers from Springfield.
Was she out there where Bob's station was later on?
This was right back this way on Jackson
Okay.
Street.
Okay.
So I worked, and I had some good friends after I finally, when I got old enough to buy a car. Then I had some good friends, Glenn Day and Lowell Wilson, and we did a lot of things together. And so one night, Glenn and I had went to the show here in Marshfield, and we were sitting there before it started, and Leona and Betty Jo George came in the theater and sat down on the aisle on the other side. I said, Glenn, now this was in the summertime, school was out. And I said, Glenn, let's go over there and sit down by that. So we did.
You probably sophomores maybe or for juniors maybe.
Probably a junior.
Sophomore?
Yeah, it was being junior. Of course, we met when we first started.
Yeah, freshman. Yeah,
Freshman.
right.
So we knew them. I said, that's Leona and Betty Jo George. I said, let's go over and sit by them.
Mhm.
It's in the middle of summertime. There wasn't no school. So we did. We went over and sat down by them. And when the show went on and they went their way and we went our way, I told Glenn, I said, when school starts, I'm going to ask Leona for a date. Well, you can continue the story.
Okay, let's do it, Leona. It's your turn now. You go ahead.
Okay. And we'd had choir and different things. And Mother had come with me and we went home one evening and she said, why don't you date the little boy that stands beside of Lowell Wilson?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, him? I wouldn't date him if he was the last man on earth. He's so stuck up.
Oh my God.
So be
Oh, my
careful
goodness.
what you say.
Yeah. You stuck up.
Yeah.
His car didn't even entice you a little bit? Or
No,
did you
not
not
at
know yet
all.
that he
I
had a
mean,
car?
I thought
Yeah.
I didn't appreciate those girls. That's kind of people. He's going, I don't want anything to do with him. So then one evening, school was out, and then we'd started. I worked at Johnny Andrews Cafe
Mm-hmm.
through my school years, and well, till my junior year, and then I went to work for Rathman's drugstore.
Okay.
But anyway, left school and happened to look over, and his car had a flat tire. And but the next day we come to school, and I wanted to be a smart aleck, I guess, and I said, "Ha ha, Rost." No, I didn't say Rost. I said, "Ha ha, Don, you had a flat tire last night, didn't you?" He was known as Duck at that time.
Duck.
Yeah.
Duck.
Donald Duck.
Oh, Donald Duck.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And we girls were all over this side walking down, and
Yeah.
the guys were all over here. And he said, "Yeah, you didn't have anything to do with it, did you?" And I said, "Not me." So we go on down to the choir, and the boys go over in their section, the girls is over in their section, and he walks over and said, how about date tonight? And I said, no, I've got to play ball. Well, after the game, could I take you home? And before I could say anything, your dad, Don Fraker, jumps up and says, oh, Don asked Leona for a date. And everybody starts clapping.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Oh, I wish I'd have known that a few years ago. Anyway, that's great. I like that.
Well,
He was a year older than you two, or I think, in
Pardon?
school. He was a year ahead of you in school,
Yeah.
my dad.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like she said, I asked her for a date. Well, she was on the softball team, and they was playing in Portland
Okay.
that afternoon, not night. So I had this old Model A, and I told Glenn, friend, I said, let's skip school and go to that ball game over at Portland. So me and him, and I think Lowell, so we did. We skipped school. I had permission from Mom. But anyhow, we went to Portland in the Model A and watched her play ball. We got ready to come back. The old Model A wouldn't start.
Mm.
And Clifton Dugan was a teacher.
Mhm. Barbara Heron's dad.
Huh?
Barbara Heron's
Yes,
dad.
yes.
Dugan.
And happened to have a log chain. Well, he hooked it on my Model A, pulled me all the way back to my. We got out, and I was ever so often I had my foot on the clutch, and ever so often I'd let off, and the thing would backfire, but it wouldn't start.
Uh-huh.
So all the way, Mr. Dugan pulled my Model A. We got out here at the top of Bill Field and Hill. I'll try it again. I tried it and it started. And I always
He's almost
will
Marshfield
think,
by then, though.
I always will think that Mr. Dugan thought we didn't have the gas. Anyhow, he pulled us all the way over here. That was, and then when we got here, the bus had already been here, and they was nowhere around.
Yeah.
Well,
Somebody had to get her home,
somebody,
right?
yeah.
I mean, come on. That's,
Finally, they came and walked, and they'd been to the sweet shop or somewhere. But anyhow, that was actually, I guess you call our first date.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's a great story. So I just happen to have the 1949 retrospect here, which, by the way, Don Rost was the Blue Jay chatter, and the retrospect, he was on the staff of the annual and the chatter.
The reason why, because I worked at the Marshfield.
Yeah, because you had already started your journalism education there, schooling. But you were the freshman class president. You were a member of the tumbling club. I guess that would be sort of like wrestling today, maybe, or I don't know. The wildlife club. You were in track, and you were in the choir. And Leona Fawcett was in FHA. She was in the choir, pep club, softball, volleyball, the culture club, and the commercial club. Now, those two are interesting. What was the culture club?
well, it started out to be fun, but it kind of just went downhill.
The culture declined, didn't it?
The culture
Yeah.
declined.
What about the commercial club? What would that have been? A business maybe or something?
Yeah, they've talked about what you'd like to do after school,
school,
and what
yeah.
you needed to take to.
Right. Well, you were both pretty popular. I mean, when you look at some of the people what they were in, you guys had long lists. I got to do this too. Now, this is a little dorky, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance here to see right there in the middle, Don and Leona, right there in the middle. See them? Good looking young couple right there. And they happened to be next to each other in the retrospect, so they were already dating then by their senior year, obviously. Engaged by then. Okay.
Married in August.
Well, tell us about that. Tell us about the engagement or how that all came down.
Well, we started dating off and on our sophomore year. And then, I don't know how it happened that we just kept seeing each other, and he wasn't seeing anybody else, and I wasn't either. And our junior year, in our dating, we went to Springfield a few times to movies. We went to the sweet shop. We did a lot of skating. Of course, we went and saw Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, all these people here at the Ritz in Marshfield.
Mm-hmm. The skating rink was down by the park, right?
Yes.
Just north of the park, like where those apartments are, I think.
And so my birthday is on April the 7th. And we were just riding around, and then we were going to go skate. And he stopped and said, I have something for you. And I said, oh, you didn't have to give me anything for my birthday. And he said, I have something for you. And he pulled out a ring box.
Now, you were seniors in high school?
No, we were juniors.
You were juniors, okay.
We were
And this
juniors.
was in April, so the school year was about over, okay.
Yeah. And so that was, he didn't say, will you marry me or anything. He just put
Gave
a
you the
ring
ring.
on my finger.
Put a ring on it. Put a ring on it. All right. Well, that's
See, we
pretty slick.
had, we couldn't go a lot of, because she worked at Andrew's Cafe.
Uh-huh.
She would get up 5 o'clock in the morning and go up there and work till school time to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Then when school was out in the evening, she'd go up there and then she'd work till what, 8 o'clock one night.
Wow.
So
Yeah. And you were working were you still at the paper then?
I was working at the
Marshfield Mail, yeah. Now, so this was in '49. When did Grandpa Rost start sawing logs out at the lumberyard location out there? Was that after you'd already graduated?
Dad finally, as I said, he worked
Mhm.
at Petosis.
Mm-hmm.
He finally quit because there was a big demand for lumber. A lot of houses in Marshfield is built out of lumber.
Sawed oak lumber. Yeah.
So Dad bought a sawmill, and this was probably in the late 40s.
You were still probably in school or just right about the time, yeah.
School. And he started sawing with a sawmill. Sometimes he would be 50 or 100,000 feet of lumber behind on orders because a lot of houses are built in Marshfield.
Was this a sawmill portable that he would take to the farms?
Yes,
Yeah.
he would buy a tract of timber. Sometimes he would buy land and all, but most of the time he would just buy the timber.
Yeah, they kept the land.
And then they would keep. So he would move. So he'd saw that off and move to another place, and he was always behind on sawing lumber. So in 1950, about 1950, 51, I guess, we got talking, and he built the lumberyard out there. It was 51 because it was so hot. I can remember me and...
That was the summer my mom and dad got married. 51,
Yeah,
May of 51.
I remember me and Uncle Fred was the one that built the building for him, and that's out there now. Uncle Fred and me and Bob, it was, the building was 50 by 100, and it was so hot, we would make a makeshift cover for us, and we'd move it as we dug the trenches. But we dug the trenches to pour the concrete, and built that in 50, I think.
And that building, that original building, was a good sized building. It was pretty big, but 50 by 100 or something. I mean, it was pretty good size.
So he still had the sawmill out in the timber. So finally he decided to move the sawmill into town, moved it in there behind the building, and then he would buy, people would bring logs in, and he'd buy a log. And so he sawed the lumber there, and then we would put it in the building, and that's where we would sell.
And you've got some pictures out there. I guess you still have them up in the lumberyard building of showing some of those trucks and hauling the logs and all of that in those early days when they were really busy out there, and
Yes, I
some
have.
really good pictures.
I've got a picture or two or three. Dad was sawing, had a sawmill set out there where Roy and Fraker had across the road for the house, timber in
38
there.
East.
And they cut somebody ordered some lumber that was 20-some feet long. Well, they had to cut these logs, so they loaded them on the truck, but it was so heavy because they were so long. When they come to a hill, the front end of the truck would raise up. So one or two of the guys that was working for Dad would get on the front bumper and ride on the front of that to hold that truck down till they got up to the top of the hill.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
we had, and then
A lot of that good timber out east of Marshfield was in hilly country too, wasn't it? I mean, I've been over even my place. I mean, there's
back then it was gravel road.
yeah.
We're out there on the Hosmer farm. The man that owned that, the man that was manager of Show Me here in town. Right now, I can't think of his name, but there was some huge trees out there, virgin timber we call it.
Is that the Hosmer farm out west, out off, right?
Out there where
Mrs. Hosmer lives now?
Yeah.
They're next to the lumberyard. Okay.
And so when you get those trees that we would call virgin timber, we wouldn't hardly have any knots in it. And Mr. Roberts was so showed me,
Okay.
and he offered to give that to Dad. The timber, it was out in a pasture. It wasn't growing out in the field. Give it to Dad, but in a deal, Dad would have to clean the limbs and get rid of all of that. So he got that.
And then didn't you buy a dozer? You bought a bulldozer then about that time, right?
At that time we bought a little dozer to load them logs with.
Yeah.
We didn't pick them up. It wasn't big enough, but we put a cable. The truck would park here. We'd have two logs running ramps, run a chain over it, and then roll them logs.
Yeah.
The logs was so big you could only get two logs on a trailer or
Right.
on a truck bed.
Right.
But that was quite a deal for a sawmill. And some of the pictures that you mentioned, Uncle Howard Gray and his son Anson run the sawmill. But
A lot of extended family members worked for you and Grandpa Rost over those years.
Yeah, all
and,
those years.
Back when I was a kid in the 60s, it was a thriving business out there on Saturdays.
Uncle David worked, Uncle Howard and Aunt Anson, different ones.
Yeah.
Tom Rost.
Right. So we've kind of got you through those high school years, and you're engaged. So then you get married. What's the date of the marriage? What day did you get married?
August the 20th,
Of
49.
49. So that was, you graduated in May, got married in August.
Yeah.
And then obviously before long you started a family, and Linda was the first child born to you, and she was the first grandchild for Kayla and Josie.
Yes. And spoiled.
Oh, I'm sure that's right. And so then you went on to have the rest of your children. Go ahead and tell us about them. Your rest of your children.
Well, to start with, we mentioned the war. Well, World War II was over in 45, 46. But after we graduated, most of the boys that was in our class in 49 had to go in the service. I was always one jump ahead. We got married. That puts us in a different class.
Right.
And the man that was in charge of the select service here, Leona worked at the drugstore, and this guy would come in and he would tell her that I was scheduled to be classified, and I would be called up. And so, well, because we were married, I was married. That set me back a little bit. Why didn't it? But then I was going to be called up, and then he told Leona, well, we started building a house. And so I was put in class number 1, and I was going to have to be called up in. I went and got a deferment to finish the house. They gave me 6 months deferment, so we could finish the house before I would call them. So then that 6 months was up, and then Linda was born.
Yeah.
And that kept me from where most of my boys and the classmates were served.
Yeah.
But
They did, but that period after World War II, which ended in 45, and then Korea didn't really start until 53. So, and I know that they were still, they were sending troops all over the world, but at least there wasn't a major conflict going on.
Right.
So it wasn't like they were like it was in say 42, 43 when
Right.
every young man
Right.
had to go. But so you did kind of fall in a period there where
well, I was fortunate.
yeah, you were able to get the deferment.
That I
yeah.
was just one step
Right,
ahead.
yeah.
Not intentionally, but
Sure.
that's just the way it was.
Sure.
That's the reason that all these classmates, most all of them had been served.
Right. One story that you've told me in the past that I wanted you to touch on, and because it happened when you were in school and maybe you weren't even married or you weren't even dating yet, but so I know I always thought it was funny. So old 66 went right through town, of course, at, where Hubble Drive is, and then the business loop came around the square and connected back up at what we call the Y,
That's
which
right.
there was a station there, and I guess the bus station was there at one time for a while.
Yeah.
And so, tell them what you would do to if you want to go to Springfield. Tell the boys what they would do.
Well,
sometimes.
Us boys, like I say, we really didn't have a lot of things to do in Marshfield. We had the Ritz Theater, we had the skating rink, but that was it. So a lot of us, several of us boys, wanted to go to Springfield for whatever we could do. Where Jackson Street run into the old highway, we would go out there. Bob Abbott had a station there. We'd go out there and stand out there by the highway, and a lot of traffic coming through. Back then, a lot of people working in Springfield. So we'd get out there and this through the summer, and we want to go. So we'd go out there and hold our thumbs up. We wanted to catch a ride to Springfield.
So you were, say, high school age maybe, but maybe not driving yet, but high school age? Maybe freshman or sophomore, maybe 14, 15 or whatever. Yeah.
Sophomore.
Yeah.
Before we was old enough to
To
get
drive,
an
yeah,
automobile.
right.
So we'd catch a ride into Springfield. People would stop you, people that you'd never seen before.
Yeah. You said there was even a lot of soldiers from Fort Wood going to Springfield on a Saturday night or something. And
Yeah, right.
they'd like give you a ride or whatever.
You knew it would work both ways.
Mhm.
We'd catch a ride to Springfield, maybe go to at that time there was 3 or 4 movie places on the square in Springfield.
Mhm.
We go to there, or we go wherever, and we'd walk back out to the station, highway patrol station was
Way station east of Stratford. Yeah.
8-way station. We walk back out to there and do the same.
That is.
Do the same thing again. Now our mom and dad didn't know we was up there, but anyhow, that would happen every once in a while
Yeah.
until we got old enough to buy a car.
Sure. I think that's really neat, and how everybody trusted everybody, and you didn't worry too much about it. I wanted to show everybody some of your journalistic abilities. So Uncle Donald is kind of the story, the keeper of the stories of the family. He's written at least these 2 books. You may have done others, but I have these 2 that you've done on Rost family history, and a lot of information here. He clipped newspaper articles and photocopied and put them together in a book, and really well done booklets. And I know you probably got these at the Historical Society, and people could check out or review or make copies, but you just have done a wonderful job over the years of keeping up with this. And you were doing this book was done probably in 1978.
Yeah.
So you were researching history and trying to document the family tree and so forth. And if you get to looking through here, there's a lot of connections to the Rost family with other families. You know, the Brixies, the Renners, the Callaways, Biggers, Replogles, the Farrs. Just an awful lot. A lot of them kind of came from that southeast Marshfield area, the Ebenezer, Rocky Point area out in there, or even further toward Seymour. Of course, we're going to do a show on the Rost history and probably have Larry Rost in here with us and maybe Craig Rost. He's been over to Germany and they've traced the history from Germany all the way over, and then the Webster County history of the Rost family started with this gentleman Jacob Frederick, which would have been your great-grandfather, our great-great-grandfather, and he settled right out there on P Highway, right out here in the area we're talking about. That's the farm that he owned when he got old enough. So we'll get into that in another show, but I think it's really interesting how much work and research you've done over the years. Hey Logan, can we go over? Do we have to cut off right at 1 2?
It's fine, bro.
Can we stay on? I mean, there's no law that says we can't stay over. Okay, good. Well, we may stay a little bit long today because you guys are just such a treasure, and it's so interesting to be able to hear these stories. And now that we've got them, Linda, in the cloud, we can review them years from now. So if you got a few more minutes, we'll hang around another 15 minutes or so, if that's okay with you.
You know, the books, really, when I worked at the Marshfield Mail, we did a lot of history for different people. And my mom always took lots of pictures. That's one good thing. And a lot of people never kept no interest. It's sad. Leona's family, they don't even know where her grandpa lived, grandma lived.
Yeah.
But anyhow, after working the Marshfield Mail and after we got married, I began to get an interest in the family. Finding out, finally that I talked to Grandpa Sam. In fact, I have a tape that I sat down with Grandpa Sam one Christmas when I'm fortunate that the Rost family always enjoyed getting together and family reunions. But I remember sitting in Grandpa Rost's in the house there and putting on a tape. My dad had a tape player and talking to him about his dad when he came from Germany. And so I began to get interested in putting some history together, and that's where all this started. This in here, and I got that one put together, and I thought years went by, and our family began to grow, and all your family, and so I just had to put another book together.
Yeah.
And I've been putting books ever since.
Yeah,
I just finished another one here
awesome.
a few months ago. Not like these, but one for our family. But that's how it all got started.
Sure.
And then to find the information and great grandfather. Of course, I don't remember him, but I remember staying with my grandpa and grandma Sam.
Yeah. Mom has lots of memories of those days as well, and your grandpa and grandma Goodnight on Grandma Josie's side of the family.
When we lived in Arkansas, I would come up here through the summer sometimes, and I remember one summer I came up here because I wanted George Melton to do some work on my teeth. So I come up here, I would stay, and I would go and visit with the family. Of course, all the Rost at that time most of them lived right out there close to where Tom, Grandpa, all day So I'd spend a night or two here and there and yonder, and got a lot of history. And so when I did want to put these books together, I kind of knew a little bit about them because I had visited with them.
Right.
And on the Goodnight side, I didn't like to go to Grandpa and Grandma Goodnight to stay all night because they lived in this big, nice house, but I had to stay upstairs.
Mom talked about staying in the attic, and it was
Yeah,
cold and
right.
hot. And,
Yeah. And but it was very interesting to put it all together. And then as years went by, we began to get the history of what brought the Rost family that started in Germany and came to the United States, and then most of them, a lot of that family ended up in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Right.
So there's some question about, you don't really know exactly what happened here or there, but it's been good.
We appreciate that, and the generations down the road will appreciate it as well. All right, Aunt Leona, I want you to tell about your other children. Even though Linda's probably the most special, you need to talk about the other kids.
And
And
their favorite dog.
yeah.
Okay. Wayne is next. He married Debbie Peterson from Park.
Wayne worked at Webster and retired now from
Yes.
Webster Electric.
And then there's quite a bit of space between each one of our kids. There's about 4 years between Linda and Wayne. And then there's about 8 or 9 between Wayne and Alan. Wayne has 2 children. Alan is married to Ann Dyke. They have, between them they have 3. And then Steve is our baby. He is 18 months younger than Alan. And he has 1 daughter and 1 grandson.
Yeah. So again, most people know all the kids went to school here in Marshfield, and Steve lives in Springfield now, but the others all live here, and so and those are my cousins, and Linda's. I mentioned there's 17 of us grandchildren, and we had a great childhood growing up.
Yes.
Very close. We always enjoyed being around each other at holidays, and I was very blessed with great aunts and uncles on both the Rost and the Fraker side, and so again, just can't give that enough praise and glory, because it was really a great time to grow up here in Marshfield, Missouri. So I guess, Uncle Don, I wanted to touch upon your political career. You know, we're kind of the politicians of the family. Grandpa Rost first ran for presiding commissioner in the 60s and served 2 terms, and then you ran for presiding commissioner in the 90s and served 2 terms, correct? 8 years, and then I ran for northern commissioner in 2008 and served a half a term, and then went on to Jeff City. And so, you know, I certainly feel like my inclination to run was because of the service that Grandpa and you and my Uncle Gene on the other side as sheriff had served, and it's just been an honor to be able to walk in your footsteps in the courthouse. But tell us a little bit about that. I mean, just for a few minutes, and Aunt Leona, you chime in when you decided to run and what it was like.
After Dad had built a lumber yard, and then we was fortunate enough that several of us, me and the boys, worked. But I always, ever since Dad got into policy, Dad first served on the city board, Marshfield City Board, and then he, Roy Fraker and Bill Phelan I remember that. They came out to the lumberyard one day. Bill Phelan was county chairman, and they came out and talked to Dad. They wanted him to run for presiding commissioner. I don't know that Dad ever had even thought about that until they came out. Don't remember.
That was 66, wasn't it? 1966, I think.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, they talked to him, and so his dad decided to run. Well, that was something I got excited about. Here an old farm boy raised on a farm, but anyhow, I watched Dad as he served his 8 years, and I just began to get more interested in politics. I guess I watched other people that was serving, and I knew I had some good friends that served. In fact, one day last week,
James Brazil.
You probably didn't know Presley Brazil.
I knew of Presley, but I certainly knew Jim.
I'll back up a little bit. When we moved back from Arkansas, we all went to Ebenezer Church, where we all. But I guess they didn't have Sunday school, but Mom sent us kids up here to the condo building. I met Presley Brazil was my Sunday school teacher. I have a New Testament 1944. Presley Brazil gave that to me.
I've heard Mom talk about going to the condo for Sunday school, but then you would go to Ebenezer for church.
Yeah. I would go to the Sunday school, but I didn't go to the church.
Right.
I guess Mom might have went back home, and we may have went out to Ebenezer.
I think that's what she said you did, or Grandma and Grandpa would pick you up, on the way to church. You'd come out of Sunday school and you'd go on to church.
But anyhow, as time went by, to get back to your question, I began to get an interest in it, and finally I told the boys, I thought, I think I'll run for. Well, I've been trying to think of the guy's name that was just before me.
Lee Bentley? Is it Lee Bentley?
No.
Oh, no, it was the gentleman from South.
South
he was a
Fork.
Democrat.
I know his name.
His wife, still, oh, shucks.
Well,
I know you're talking about.
She was a license bureau or something.
Yeah, she had the license bureau. Yeah.
But anyhow,
Yeah.
I decided to run. He had the office and wasn't running, so I ran and was elected. And Leon Atkinson, whom we had sold a lot of lumber when he had the casket factory, I knew Leon was on that. Back then it was
Western and Eastern back then, I think.
And Ken Owens was. So that's who I worked with, and got along real good with him.
Yeah.
And then decided to run again, and I had a lot of good people working in the courthouse. I have to say, I had got along good. We had some good people working. Lois, your mom, worked across the hallway.
Assessor's office.
And there was a lot of good people that I had an opportunity to work with. So I enjoyed it, but Lois Minor, Lois was, when we lived out here on 38 in the little house out here, which was between 38 and 40.
Before you went to Calico Rock.
Yeah, before we went. The Bingham family lived across the road. Lois was a Bingham. She married I can't think.
Hyder and then Minor.
Hyder.
Yeah, he died and then Minor.
But anyhow, she was in office when I first started. So that was a plus for me.
Yeah.
It helped me. And so Lois and then Mary Cunningham was in there.
Treasurer.
And we all decided we didn't want to run anymore.
Yeah.
So after, and Lois had been in the courthouse quite a few years.
Yeah.
But
And that's when Paul Ipock ran, and he's been in ever since as presiding commissioner. He followed you, Paul Ipock.
Paul Ipock.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul came to me and wanted to know if I was going to run again, and talked quite a bit, and he decided he was going to run. John Bill Greer came to me and he said, wanted to know if I was going to run again. And he said, I want to run, but he said, I'm not going to do it. I said, no, I'm not going to. But anyhow, Paul ran a good campaign, and of course Paul's still in there. And I noticed we had seen the paper. I noticed that he and his wife celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, so that was kind of after that you pretty much retired, I guess you might say, or you retired back to the lumberyard.
We had a lot of I had a lot of good experiences while I was in there. We had a major problem. The only one that we really had a problem was when we were in there. They wanted to build a juvenile detention center, and we were in the process of putting an elevator in the
Now, I know you didn't have any money in those days.
Huh?
You didn't have any money in those days. There was
No,
not much
right,
money.
we
It was
didn't
tight.
have money.
Things
It
were
was
really
tight.
tight then.
We
Yeah.
couldn't do
No.
much. And we were in the process of getting an elevator put in the courthouse and new places for the sheriff. And we were right in the middle of doing that. And of course, you know, and I know that you have your county budget has to be approved at the end of January
Yeah.
for the whole year. Well, in the middle of the year, the judge called a meeting for all the 5 counties, and we're going to build a juvenile detention center, and the counties are going to have to pay for it. And we met in Bolivar, Buffalo, somewhere anyhow, and he introduced us to what he was going to do, and we could respond. And of course, the law says you have to have your budget done and approved by the end of January.
Yeah.
And my question was so I asked the judge, what can we do? We can't change. That wasn't his problem. And when the sheriff got up there and said, told the judge, he said, this juvenile detention center would be part of law enforcement, so they're probably going to cut my salary to do that. The judge says if they do that, you let me know. So it was it got down to the point that we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And we let the judge know we couldn't do it. We said, if you put it off till next year, we put it in the budget.
Yeah.
Well, and tell you the truth, I think he and the judge and Bolivar.
Yeah. It ended up in Bolivar.
It was
And you know that facility's not even there anymore.
fixed up. It was already fixed up
Yeah.
before. But anyhow, it was some good times. We had the president came and
Yes, that's right.
1991.
That was a highlight for sure.
Very exciting time for us.
Do you remember when President Truman rode the train through Marshfield back?
Yes,
You do remember that?
Yeah.
Wish we had more time. I'd love to heard more about that. But I know
the train stopped down there by Jim and Wayne
Yeah, the
Station.
where the depot was.
It was a little bit late, and it was about 11 o'clock or after. Nate Dugan was county Democratic chairman. Got on the bus or on the train in Springfield and rode down to Marshfield, and he came out, and I'm not sure that he's the one that introduced, but he was on the train, and then Mr. Truman came out and spoke to us on that.
Yeah.
And
That's good. I never heard that, but I knew that.
Then I said I'm pretty fortunate. I met 3 presidents. Nicholas Edmonds and Linda and Leona. Some of us went to where President lives. And
Carter, President Carter.
Carter, we met him down
Right.
there.
Yeah.
But the president here in '91 was something that was really.
It was, and Roy Howard Beck has done in that podcast that he did with you at the Cherry Blossom Festival. You and Wayne Plunkett. He made the comment of how rare it is that a United States president would spend time in a rural town on the 4th of July. I think he would narrow it down to where he didn't know for sure, but it was just a handful of times that that's ever been done, because typically they're either at their either the White House or their homes or their vacation homes or Camp David or on a trip or whatever, and it's just rare that they would celebrate the 4th of July in small town America, walking a parade, shaking hands with, you might say, common citizens.
Right.
And so I thought that was interesting the way he spun that, or the way he described that. But
yeah, it was. And Linda spent all the time putting it all.
yeah, you were the city coordinator or the county coordinator for that, and Barth helped, I know, with a lot on that. And I was fortunate to be on the advanced team, or drove the advanced team, some of the people. But so I wanted to get to Linda. I'm glad that was a great introduction there. Well, so as the director of the Webster County Historical Society, if you'd like to speak for just a minute about your organization and what you do, and how important it is to preserve history in Webster County.
It is, and this is so good, because we lose so much, as each generation starts to pass away. So much is gone.
Yeah.
We try to preserve as much as we can on a very, very, very limited budget.
Right.
So this is wonderful.
Yeah,
This
well,
is really
we're glad to do it, and we're going to continue to do it, and we'll do even more with it as time goes. We're still learning a little bit about how to do these, but I'm just really, really pleased that people seem to appreciate it and support it, and we'll have you back for sure, and you can be thinking about more stories. The stories that no one else has ever really heard before are the great ones, the ones that just you two know about, that you can share, and things like that. So. It's just really been a treat, and my honor to have you in today. And again, we'll have you in again. The last thing I'm going to mention, because it's been so important in your lives and all of our lives, I did want to mention your all of 3 of your talents in vocal music. And you mentioned the gospel singing. You've led the choir at Ebenezer. Linda's got a wonderful voice and sung in groups and quartets, and so have you guys. And of course, my mom and dad did as well. Barth's very talented. Many family members. Your boys can sing. It's just it's such a blessing that we've been allowed to have that music around us, and it's helped shape our families, I believe, to become who we are today. And I can remember the reel-to-reel recordings that Mr. Farr used to do. Wasn't his name Farr, that would come to Cale and Josie's and record you all singing?
Yeah.
And on reel-to-reel tapes.
Yeah.
And wasn't his name Farr?
Yes, yes.
And no, he wasn't Uncle Bill. It was his brother
Oh,
or some.
Lon.
I don't know, but he lived up toward Kansas City. That's right.
Yeah.
But just because And I get I'm sure some of those recordings are still around.
We need to find
Yeah.
those.
Roy Farr, yeah. And then you mentioned the recordings of Grandpa Sam singing the notes, singing the notes.
Right.
Yeah.
Mom and he sang some songs together, and it was played on the radio station here, for Mr. Turnbow's gospel hour or whatever. So anyway, that's just been a big important part of our family's life, and I wanted to mention that. And you have a beautiful tender voice, and
Well,
You-
the Lord has been good to us,
Right.
and
right,
I remember we served how many years in the Gideon ministry,
mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I met a lot of people that I would have met otherwise, because I have spoken, how many churches in Webster County
Right.
through the Gideon ministry,
Right.
and it's a wonderful ministry. It's changed, like some of the churches it's changed. It's when we first got into Gideon ministry, it was just a regular thing that you'd go into the schools and you would distribute New Testaments in the 5th grade. Well, now you can't do that.
That's right. That's right.
But God's been good to
Yeah.
us, give us good health and help us along the way. And we had what we called the Cancer Singers. It was a bunch of singers. We'd get together every Saturday night, and we would sing for an hour. Then we'd sit down at a table and we'd have fellowship for another hour.
That means eat good food together, right?
Yeah, and this went on for years, 20.
Yeah.
And then that same bunch, we joined getting together and having fellowship. We started going to Stockton Lake, and 2 weeks out of a year, I guess it was.
Yeah, I remember when you all did that.
Then they built Truman Dam, Truman Lake, and so then we moved up to Truman then, and stayed another 20 years. Not all the cancers, because by that time, half of them was gone.
Yeah.
But we had a
Why
lot.
was it called the Kinser Singers?
Well, there's a lady in Lebanon North in Portland. Her name was Kinser.
Okay.
She and her husband. Her husband died before we started singing.
Robert Kincher.
But anyhow, and she and Tom and May McDonald had a quartet, and Tommy
Floyd?
No.
who sung bass. Who sang? Well, anyhow, this Kitchen lady could sing bass as good as any man.
Really?
Yeah, she could.
Huh.
So they had a quartet.
Sam Pursley sang.
Sam Pursley.
Sam, yeah.
And so they invited Leona and I to start joining. Well, then we had this and this and this and that. We ended up with probably 20, 25 people.
Yeah. I see.
Then we started going to the lake for when we went to the Truman, we'd go and stay 2 nights and 3 days every other week. That went on for 20 years.
Wow. I knew, yeah.
That
You've
was,
done a lot of hunting and fishing in your life. You
Oh,
were
yes,
definitely an
yeah.
outdoorsman.
and Daddy started.
Yeah.
Daddy and,
He-
and Leona's brother,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
they started to go down,
Yeah.
but they started going to the lake.
And you speaking of him, he liked to coon hunt, right? Grandpa Rost liked to squirrel or hunt or coon hunt back in the day.
Yeah,
Way
yeah.
back there. He did a lot of
we had a lot of good years.
coyote hunting, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we better wrap it up. Logan, what time is it?
2:24.
Wow, we went almost an hour and a half. Isn't that amazing what happens when you're having fun?
Oh,
Well, thank you all
Good
again.
people.
I think you said it the right thing to wrap it up. The Lord's been good to us, and
Yes.
it's a good way to end the show today. And we'll have y'all back and have some more folks that hopefully everybody will enjoy and hear more stories about Marshfield and Webster County. And so we'll plan on doing this again next week, same time, same station. We'll see who our guests are in the day or two, and we'll announce that. And with that, we'll we'll say God bless you and have a good week.
Thank you.
You betcha. Thank you, guys.
Been an honor and
Yeah.
a privilege. I said an
Awesome.
honor and a privilege for us.
Thanks.
Brought
Yeah.
back a lot of memories because, you know, we can remember years and years and climbing up and down the stairs.
Yeah.
Because, you know, back then, if you had a class on the top floor, our locker room was always in the basement, so you had to run up and down the. And Mr. Jackson, our superintendent, didn't like that if you had to run. And Mr. Jackson would stand out in the hall, his office over here. And if you run, I can still see that. Yeah, and it happened all the time because if you had a class on the top floor and you had to go back to your locker room and then had another class back up there, you had to almost run.
You had to run to get
because
there.
the restrooms was down there too.
Right.
So a lot of different memories. Another experience we had in this building was when we were seniors, I guess. Started our English class. We had a young woman just out of college was our English teacher. Well, most of our class, most of the boys lived on a farm, and they had to work, and some of them, like me, had a job. She gave us so much homework that we couldn't get it done. We
Just do like me and not do it.
Yeah.
So they brought in, they got rid of her. FL Standard, the preacher's wife, was temporary. Terry Elmore. We had 5 different teachers before Charlotte Guthrie was our 5th one, and she was good.
Now you talked about earlier about somebody being spoiled. It sounded to me like you guys were spoiled. It sounded to me like you guys were spoiled if you made them get rid of the teachers. Spoiled. You were spoiled.
You were spoiled.
Oh, yeah. Let me finish that story about the teachers. We just couldn't stand it, so we decided to go on a strike. No, I'm telling you the truth. So we all got together one day when it was time to go upstairs for our English class. Instead of doing that, we went down in the basement, down in the
Boiler room.
no, the
Jim.
Oh, the old gym.
gym.
Yeah.
went down to the gym and sat down there. Well, we wasn't sitting there very long till Jack Russell was principal. Come down there and give us a good chewing out. But anyhow.
We're going to end on that. It's time to go. We got to go.
Yeah. Okay.
See ya.